Kerry, Rural Women New Zealand, what's the latest? Because you do a lot of wonderful things.
We do, and actually Rural Women's been very, very busy lately, particularly in advocacy and profile building activities. We've been doing a lot of work on the new Firearms changes to that Act.
As in?
There was just reviews of what was happening, so we made submissions on that and met with Paula Bennett and her staff to talk about the impacts of potential changes for the rural community. And it was really around common sense stuff and making sure that whatever changes are made are rural proofed, because you know rural people have a different need of firearms than perhaps others or hunters or recreational users might have. So we wanted to make sure that what was being done wasn't going to impact on farming and farmers' abilities and so on with the use of firearms.
No stupidity like that suggestion that all the farmers put all their guns into one particular place and came in and signed them out.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
Like,
practicalities that
hello?
just aren't going to work when you look at it in a rural environment. So we talk very much about that. And it's certainly been a key focus of a lot of our advocacy lately. There seems to be a move away from rural proofing policies, and we want to get back in and say, hey, look, you know, things are different for the rural, and you should be looking at rural as a sector in its own right. You know, whether you look at youth or cultural groups or whatever, but rural needs its own sector because there's so many things that are different, and that was a key focus of a lot of our advocacy. We've also talked about the domestic violence bill and things that were needed there. Certainly there was a lot of talk in the media at the time about special leave for domestic violence, and people saying, oh, what do you need that for? Well, actually for rural people it's not such a bad idea because all the support services are usually in town. So, you know, for women or even men to access those services, you need time off. You know, you need time to go to town, organise somewhere else to live, organise any kind of whatever support you need. And you actually need time off work to be able to do that. So having leave for that's actually quite a sensible suggestion, and so we were quite supportive of that in principle.
Where would they go?
Well, a lot of rural towns don't even have women's refuge, so you need somewhere to go. You need to find access to that, and you also need to go to town, find out where you can find a house to live in, where you can move, where you can perhaps find other work or whatever legal proceedings. If you've got to go to court, you need time off to do those things. So having special leave related to that is actually quite useful, particularly for rural women who have to travel long distances to gain support services.
Here, I'm going to suggest that if somebody who's being a victim of rural violence, personal violence in the rural area, wouldn't know where to start looking at that, are you as an organisation available to help guide people through to a degree? Yes,
certainly through our national office and our local branches we could steer people in the right direction, but most people would access that through initially self-referring to the likes of Women's Refuge, who even if they don't have services in that location can walk people through the process.
Yep.
So it's either through the Women's Refuge or the police, or some people even just access it through talking to their GP.
I was just going to say
and
GP.
Just say, you know, I've got this problem at home, and the GP can help steer them in the right direction and to whatever the services.
It's a case of opening doors, because that woman would have absolutely no self-respect left, I would imagine. Often
that's the case, and feel very unempowered and feel that they don't even have the ability to ask for help. So, you know, there are ways of getting to that help quite simply.
That's good.
So
that's important for them.
Things like a special leave, we can take a day off work to go and organise that stuff, is really helpful, especially when it's not available in your local town and you've got to travel somewhere. We also talked about the changes to the Education Amendment Act and how that can be rural proofed and things that we need to look at from the rural perspective. It's things like, you know, just that universal right to quality education. It needs to be the same in town as it is to rural, and which is all about resourcing and funding. We also talked about the importance of retaining school in the community, making sure we don't close our rural schools, that they're there because of the role that they have within the community, that greater role of being the glue that holds a community together. Often people say that, you know, once their children finish school, they're kind of out of the loop, and school's so important in a rural community. The other thing we were very concerned about is the move to more online learning, which is really going to impact in rural communities because the government's done a lot of work in getting broadband through fibre to the school, but the households don't have that access. So if you then start saying, oh, we're going to do more online learning, how do the children access that when they haven't got internet at home? So we're talking about, you've actually got to think how it's going to impact beyond the school building if you change those sorts of policies. So we did a lot of work around that. We've also been investigating things such as GP shortages in the rural communities, what's needed, what are the gaps, what kind of programs need to be put in place. The voluntary bonding hasn't been perhaps as successful as it might have been, so what else needs to happen? How do we access good numbers of GPs for the shortages that are already there, and recognising that there is an ageing workforce who are all going to be retiring in the next 10 years or so. How do we make sure that we've still got good GP services? And boarding allowances for children going to boarding schools, and making sure that that's a realistic program, that it's actually providing the assistance that people are needing. Also, we were heavily involved in the South Pacific Area Conference for Associated Country Women of the World, which was held in New Plymouth at the start of May. We had quite a large contingent of women there, and we talked about a range of issues, quite a wide number of issues. We went through cervical screening programs. We talked about button batteries. It's those little cell batteries that children seem to swallow with great regularity, and wanting to push for greater safety standards around that. We also talked about marine protection of the marine environment, both the corals and the fish and food resources. Very important to a lot of our South Pacific island nations in terms of their food security, which was the other issue we talked about quite broadly, was the differences in the values between food security and food sovereignty. And a lot of people think they're the same thing, and they're actually not. Food security is about making sure people have enough food, good quality food, as they need it. Food sovereignty takes that further and talks about the actual production of the food. Who's in charge? Do you have control over your land ownership? Who owns the land? Who decides what fertilisers you can put in? Who decides what access to water you have, or access to seeds, and how are those seeds produced? Who controls the price of your product and where and when it's marketed? And that's all around sovereignty. And so we're seeing a greater move from people, whether it be subsistence farming right up to corporate farming, is who's actually controlling the production of the food. And once you control production of your own food, you then have food security. So a lot more
comes in together, doesn't it? Thank you
does.
very much indeed. Now, we've already heard about the fact that New Zealand horses are going over to Australia, and I shouldn't smirk, but they are actually doing very, very well. We meet up with Peter Rudkin, who's actually taking one of his clients' horses over to do exactly that.